All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and kick off this webinar. My name is Jordan Muela. I am the CEO of Lead Simple, and today's topic is how to design a killer sales process. This is the first full week of the year, and I am super excited to be talking about this topic because this is really kind of gets at the heart and soul about how to structure your 2015 for success. So before I do that, I just want to mention that Lead Simple is the ultimate sales tool for capturing and closing leads. We focus on enabling lightning fast response times, better follow-up, and helping gain total visibility into your sales performance. Now, the outline for today's webinar, we're going to start off talking about why process matters, and we're going to move on to looking at a 5-step model for refining your sales process. So starting here at the top here, why does process matter? And really, to get at that, we want to look and understand what the average sales process looks like. And unfortunately, it looks a lot like this. It looks like once that process kicks off, more or less taking a spin on the wheel of sales. And what that means is every time a lead comes in, we're not necessarily sure if we're going to call first or if we're going to email first. When we actually do get a hold of the prospect, we're not sure how we're going to deal with objections. This time it could be that we send out an agreement or contract early on, or that could happen later in the process. There's no real continuity of process, which means there's no continuity of experience for the person on the other end. None of that is good for a variety of reasons that we'll get into in a bit here. But this is what most companies are dealing with, is an inconsistent sales process. And the reality is that sales ultimately boils down to half lead quality and half sales process. You can have great quality leads, but if you're bungling your sales process, you're going to be robbing yourself of the full potential of what those leads could have actually done for you, and vice versa. You could have low quality leads, but if you have a razor sharp process that is methodical and consistent, you can radically improve the yield that you can get from those lower quality leads. So I want to talk a little bit about what process does for you. How does process benefit you? And this is one of the first things that it does is it eliminates, it reduces, it takes away the extraneous, the superfluous, the unnecessary repetitive action, the unnecessary thinking, and distills things down to one refined concept and model that we can follow on an ongoing basis. Similarly, process unifies. It gives us a rallying cry. It gives us a well thought out plan of attack that we can think through once, discuss openly, and then execute on consistently. And similarly, process empowers. When you bring somebody else on board and you tell them, hey, you know what, we have a battle plan, we've done this before, in fact, we've done the exact process that you're going to go through in your job role thousands of times, here's what we learned, and here's the comprehensive blueprint for how you can do your job and succeed in it from day one. That's a form of empowerment that every single company should be aspiring to. And ultimately, process also differentiates. People tend to think of process as kind of a dry, mechanistic thing, but the reality is process is the heart and soul of your business. Process is being greeted when you walk in the store. Process is how the phone is answered. Process is how we react when things go wrong. Process is experiencing a higher level of service no matter who at the company you're dealing with. Process is also where scale comes from. People don't scale. Processes, which are fundamentally an extension of your culture, do scale. So as you're thinking long term, as you're thinking about growth, as you're thinking about fulfilling on whatever expectation you have for expanding your operation, you're fundamentally going to have to choose whether or not you're going to invest in process which can enable that growth, or if you're going to allow it to be a bottleneck that will constrain and restrict growth. Even the most successful, explosive salesperson, at the end of the day, if there's not process to back that up, there's going to be massive bottlenecks. And finally, process lasts. Fads come and go. The commitment to understanding and optimizing how your business operates, though, that transcends any one moment, idea, marketing campaign, staff turnover, etc. Finally, process also adapts. So when you think about all of the various things that are going to happen over the next year, the unanticipated situations, things that could potentially go wrong or right, when you think about your core commitments to success, the things that are going to carry you through the highs and through the lows, that really is what process is. It is a form of ongoing leverage. It's not a one-time thing. We talk about the focus here with what we're talking about is growth, sales, marketing, etc. You can think about all manner of successful campaigns that you could pull off and drive great results for a week, a month, a quarter, etc. But that ends at some point. Process is a form of ongoing leverage. It's investing in you, it's investing in yourself, and investing in your business. And I love this quote from Tom Summers. When each step in the sales process is handled correctly, the close is the natural conclusion. It's not forced, it's not strained, it's not uncomfortable selling, it's just the natural outcome and byproduct that stems from having totally mapped out what the consumer needs, wants, desires, and then responding to that in a systematic way. Bottom line, your sales process will define your sales results in this coming year. So now let's actually dive into some specific action steps for perfecting your sales process. And the first one that we're going to look at is documenting your current process. This is another great quote here. This is Edward Deming, the father of the modern quality management movement. The quote is that you can't describe what you're doing as a process. If you can't describe what you're doing as a process, you don't know what you are doing. And I realize to some people that may sound a little bit harsh, but here's basically what he's saying. If you lack the ability to articulate what you do on a day-to-day basis, you necessarily have a low-level understanding of those activities. Now, people tell me all the time, hey, I tend to shoot from the hip. It's kind of a muscle memory type thing for me, and that's great. But at the end of the day, we can only muscle memory our way through so many problems, and muscle memory is not designed for complex, ongoing, repeated processes with high degrees of variability. So what I'm getting at here is that for many people, there is an illusion of order and understanding that isn't backed up by a whole lot. And that's understandable that we have a desire to view ourselves as knowing what's going on in our business. Frankly, it's embarrassing to admit that you don't know what's going on. We wouldn't accept this in certain areas of our business. For example, whatever your core service is, whatever you deliver to customers, if a customer was to ask you, how do you produce this? How do you deliver this service? And you were to say, well, I'm not really sure. It just kind of happens. Obviously, that wouldn't happen. Obviously, that would be unacceptable. And it's the same story in that sales service that you also provide to your customers, that as a part of the total package that your customers experience as prospects on the way to customers. And I can't overemphasize how important this first step is of documentation. A lot of people tend to blow this off as if it's kind of perfunctory or not really necessary, but this is absolutely critical. And if you skip this step, I'm afraid that you're going to sabotage all of the others. So let's really zone in here. Here's what this step is. I want you to go back and look at the last 15 leads that came in to your company. I want you to go find them, talk to other people in the company that handle them if you weren't actually responsible for handling those leads. And I want you to stitch together a forensic of what happened with those leads. We basically want to do a sales audit. And what I want you to do is to focus on asking very, very specific questions about what happened at each stage of the process with those leads. Now, we're going to get into the weeds a bit here with these granular questions that I'm going to go over in a second, but I want you to keep in mind that the goal here is discovery. This is a personal jumping off point for you to go through, audit, and generate your own insights and questions. There are some big level conclusions that we're going to talk about in a bit, but there's no other way for you to have a hands-on insight into what's going on in your company other than auditing your sales process. And that's exactly what this looks like. So we want to go back, look at these 15 leads, and we want to ask questions like, where did each lead come from? Lead source attribution. Did it come from your website? If so, was that from organic SEO? Was that from a pay-per-click campaign? Did it come from a third-party lead generator? Was it a referral? If it was a referral, what kind? From an existing client, from another vendor, etc. A common thing that we see is for leads to be labeled as something like call in, walk in, etc. Every single lead should be properly attributed because it did come from somewhere and originate somewhere. Even if you can't answer that question currently, it still is worth knowing that that's something that you're not currently tracking. How were leads distributed? How did that lead get from the initial point of contact to the person that was actually responsible for follow-up in the company? Was that automated? Was that manual? How was the responsible party, the person that was actually supposed to directly respond, how were they notified? Were they notified of that new lead via text, email, a shout across the cubicle? How did that actually go down? And then how long did that process take from when the lead was generated to when it got in the hands of the person responsible for responding? How long did that process take? And what were the constituent steps? Was the lead emailed or called for first? That may seem like a small deal. It's not. It matters. 99% of the time, you should be calling first. Next, how long did it take to make the first call? Was it 5 minutes, a half hour, an hour, 5 hours? On a regular basis, when dealing with new customers, we oftentimes ask these kinds of questions and we get some real kind of guttural off the hip kind of answers. But what we found is that typically most people radically overestimate how quickly they're responding to new leads. The only way is to document your process. How did that first call go? What was discussed? What questions were asked? What objections were raised? Second call, same story. How many calls did it take to actually make contact with that person? How many leads of those last 15, 20, 30 that you're auditing, how many of those leads were unreachable? You just couldn't get a hold of the person on the other line. And how many calls and emails were made to those leads that were determined as unreachable? Was there 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 follow-up attempts? And what was the degree of variability? Was one unreachable lead followed up with twice and another followed up with 4 times, etc.? How many leads agreed to actually have meetings? How many of those meetings actually were completed? What forms and files were sent to each lead? We're talking about business process documents. We're also talking about marketing collateral. And we're also talking about at what step in the process were those documents sent out for each lead and then in aggregate on average. How many of those leads were won or lost? What was the reason for the leads that were lost? Was it that they went with a competitor? Did they say they're not ready right now? Did they say that they just had some personal objection to your service? Was it pricing, etc.? How were follow-up actions scheduled? This is a big one. How are people getting tasks out of their brain in your organization? Are they managing it with scraps of paper, with notebooks, with email, with task managers, with third-party software applications? We've seen things all over the map. It's a great question to answer. So a big question here is, what will you find by doing this? You have no idea. There's no way to find out other than by digging in. But what I can guarantee you with 100% certainty is that you will be surprised. Even if I'm talking to you, the person that actually took all of those follow-up actions. By going back and doing this diagnostic, by doing this audit, you will absolutely be surprised with the results. And this is a great way to start off your year by digging in and seeing what the status quo is. Because the reality is, this could be your process. You could go through here and find that your process is basically taking a spin on the wheel of fortune every time a new lead comes in and handling things with very, very little consistency. In fact, I would suggest that this is more than likely the case for at least parts of your process. So it's really worth digging in there. Second step is mapping your new process. We're going from the status quo to our new ideal. The first rule here is to always start off by laying out your sales stages. Really important. Your sales stages are basically the buckets that a lead goes through. Right now, we're looking at the default sales stages inside of Lead Simple. You can and should customize this for your own company, but I basically want you to be thinking about when a lead comes in. Obviously, they start off as new, and then you make initial contact, and presumably you schedule a meeting. And then at some point, maybe you get a verbal commitment. Eventually, all leads are either won or lost or marked as invalid. Now, if a lead is marked as lost, obviously you could write down a specific reason. Some of the reasons here are listed, have to do for property management companies in particular. And the last category there is nurturing. So these are leads that have not given you a hard no and that you're still interested in maintaining some level of interaction with. Active nurturing basically means that this person is still worth calling, in your opinion. Passive nurturing means that they're not responsive enough that it's worth your time to actually do outbound phone calls, but you still want to reach out to them via email, potentially in some kind of an automated fashion. Really important, define these stages. How do people move through your sales process? The second rule is to always create stage-specific follow-up actions. And so what we're talking about here is the stages are basically the fundamental building block of your sales process. These are how leads move through your sales process. And when we look at building follow-up actions, they should always be connected to those things, because every given stage has a different set of follow-up actions. So the follow-up actions that you would want to take on a consistent basis when a lead is new are different than when a lead has scheduled a meeting with you or made a verbal commitment or just signed a contract, etc. So this is a very close relationship between stages and the follow-up actions that we would call workflows. A workflow is basically just a pre-scheduled series of tasks. And this is more or less the holy grail of what we want to be working towards in your sales process, is connecting stages with workflows and then adding templates in between. So this is basically a visualization of this concept. The blue, orange, yellow, and green bars that we see here, these are the stages. Stages like new, contacted, meeting, won, etc. Those are the stages, and inside of those stages, we have workflows, these pre-scheduled list of tasks that should be followed up with every single time that we get a lead. And lastly, we would add to that email templates. And this is where some creative automation comes in. This is where some more process-driven leverage comes in. Because the reality is, you send out repeated emails over and over again throughout the year that have a very little nominal degree of variability. These are welcome emails, introduction emails, onboarding new client emails, basic follow-up emails, etc. So taking the time to examine, hone, and refine your templates based on how well people are actually responding to those things, that's a huge form of ongoing leverage. And so when we put it all together, we take a stage, like for example, when a lead is new, we add a series of follow-up steps that are basically a workflow. All right, we want to follow up twice on the first day, once immediately, a second time a half hour later. We want to follow up again on day 2, on day 3, and day 5, and day 10. After day 10, which is, let's say, our 7th follow-up, that's when we want to quit. And we basically at that point can say we've done our due diligence to try and get in touch with this person. We're now going to move them out of the new stage into most likely a nurturing stage. And that makes sense. And you can say with a clean conscience, hey, you know what? We did our best. We have lived up to our internal expectations of ourselves to be able to communicate with prospects. And now we can move on. So I want to dive into a very specific and granular sales process for one stage, and that is initial follow-up. This is a sales process for the first 60 minutes in the life of a lead. It doesn't get more granular than this. This is just an example. You could always modify and tweak this, but this is a very clear and explicitly defined process. A lead comes in immediately right out of the gate. What do? We find the first available agent. Secondarily, we assign the lead to that person. Now, and then we make our initial calls. This should be happening within 60 seconds of actually receiving that lead. We should be following up with that person. If the lead wasn't followed up with in, let's say, 5 minutes, we want to go ahead and notify the sales manager. This is an event that we should be notified of and be on top of if a lead is sitting idly, not receiving attention. Because as those minutes are passing by, the likelihood of getting in touch with and converting that lead are dramatically falling off of a cliff. If that person actually picks up, then we want to go ahead and make our best attempt to actually schedule a meeting in person. If we're able to actually get that meeting in person, then we want to go ahead and update the stage to meeting. We want to send out a confirmation email. We want to schedule a reminder, etc. If we are unable to get a hold of that person, then we want to go ahead and leave a voicemail. If we do get a hold of that person, but we are unable to get a meeting scheduled, then we want to change the lead stage to contacted. We want to send a follow-up email, and we want to add to our follow-up schedule to make sure that we are on top of getting in touch with this person on an ongoing basis. Again, you can tweak and modify this. The point here is this is explicitly defined. There's no question marks. There's no room here for, well, I didn't get it. I didn't know what it was supposed to do. It was written down, documented. This took about half an hour for me to mock up. Anybody can do this. And this is something you can take to the bank 365 days a year. Absolutely worth investing in. The third step here is to focus on improving one step in your process. We want to take things one step at a time and really have laser focus. This is a helpful graphic from Brian Balfour, works with HubSpot. And the basic idea here is that focus is going to drive action in your company. It allows you to move faster because you're explicitly commandeering all of your resources to drive results in one area of your business. As you're more focused, that's going to generate more awareness and mindfulness of what's going on in that area of your business. And it's also going to generate more results. It's going to generate more confidence because of those results, and it's also going to create more value for end users. So this is kind of a virtuous cycle that stems from focusing on one area of your business. Now, this could be one marketing campaign. This could be one stage of the sales process. It could be one aspect of your product. Today, we're talking about sales, but this is a very broad concept. So what are some potential starting points inside of your sales process that we could use as kind of the jumping off point to start refining? Reality is they're endless. There's always going to be low-hanging fruit somewhere inside of your company. Let's say, for example, that it was first contact. We want to focus on driving down initial lead response times. Start by implementing tracking and then move to some form of automation. First contact is huge. Most companies do a terrible job of this. Industry averages from industry to industry to industry are 40 hours plus, meaning that on average, it takes about 40 hours between a company receiving a lead and actually calling that person back on the phone. And this just absolutely broadly rings true with the vast majority of the companies that we deal with. So this is low-hanging fruit. It's easily actionable. This would be a great place to start focusing and to see if this actually drives results for your company, and it will. Secondarily, appointments. Create one significant piece of sales collateral and then embed it in your sales process so every prospect sees it. What's the point? The point is to communicate professionalism, to communicate a high degree of confidence in the consumer so that they actually book an appointment with your organization. And obviously there are more things that you could do to try and drive appointments. That could be making the ask for the appointment sooner. That could be making scheduling the appointment a precursor to actually sending out a contract of your services, etc. But the goal here is to turn a higher percentage of leads into scheduled appointments. And secondarily is actually getting those appointments to actually happen, right? These are completed meetings. And so to drive more of those appointments into actual meetings that happen, you could use an automated reminder service, like for example, appointmentreminder.org. Great service. Shout out to Patrick McKenzie. Next up, closing leads. This is the ultimate end game, but the reality is this is only one step in the process. Yes, you want to close leads, but when you're actually making for that ask, when you're actually putting dollars in hand and asking somebody to sign on the dotted line, that's happening. There are a number of steps that should have already taken place before we get to that point. And so when we are at that point, what can we do to optimize for the close? As an example, it could be offers. It could be focusing on testing a new promotional offer and tracking close rates for the people you offer it to versus those you don't. Creative offers have driven massive results for a lot of the companies that we work with. And this is a great example of something that is free. It's a mind game. It is creative effort. This is not necessarily to say that you have to reduce your margins. It doesn't have to be just some kind of a straight discount. There's a lot of creative offers. It could be tickets to a ball game or a number of different things. But this is a great way to drive that final signature on the dotted line. Or your starting point for process improvement could be loss tracking. This is another super easy one that makes such a big difference. When you look back over the last year as you're preparing for the next year, and you think about all the leads that came in, all the ones that you won, let's focus on the ones you lost. Why did those leads end up falling out? Was it they went with a competitor? Were they unhappy about pricing? Was it that they just simply weren't ready to buy yet and they asked you to call them back, but rather than actually nurturing them, you just decided to dump them altogether? There's a lot of different reasons here, and when we break that down, the probability is going to be that there's a pretty decent slice of the pie of those lost reasons that you can actually do something about. Some you can't. Like, for example, if you have tire kickers that are wanting to cut you to the knees in pricing, maybe those aren't people you want to deal with. There's nothing you can do there. But a lot of these folks are going to express reasons that are things within the scope of what you can take action on. Last thing, lead nurturing. Obviously, this is huge. I don't even have time to go into this one. But the bottom line is you can create long-term follow-up schedule and nurturing campaign to drive massive results. This is a little more advanced. We're actually going to be talking about this in an upcoming webinar, but this is another example of a starting point of where you could be focusing, honing, and zoning in one specific area of your business. Before we go on, I just want to mention that we always want to end these exercises, these focus-driven exercises, with measurement. We want to start off, say, what was our baseline in that section of the process? For example, going from meetings scheduled to meetings completed. What was our current transfer rate at that stage of the process? Now we've made some tweaks. Now we've given those changes enough time to actually run. We've had enough throughput in terms of volume of leads to actually be able to make a reasonable determination of whether or not this is working or not. And that's huge, guys. You don't want to be the guy that spends $50 on a lead advertising source, doesn't get any actual sales from it, and says that it's complete garbage. You want to be the guy that takes a long-term view of selling and takes a long-term view of process success. So always go back and end whatever area of focus you have with measurement to actually determine whether or not there was meaningful change. Step 4. Develop your SLA. SLA stands for service level agreement. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. I wish more companies were doing this. This is what an SLA is. An SLA is basically a report card for the key primary metrics that you want to grade sales performance by. Now, I've chosen to reduce that down to 2 very primary figures. That is speed to call and number of follow-up attempts. So think of this as basically response time and persistence. Now, in the big scheme of things, there's a lot that you could add to this, but this is a great, super simple starting point. How quickly do you want your agents to be responding to new leads? 3 hours, an hour, 5 minutes? Write it down. Make it canonical. How many times should your agents be following up before they actually give up on a given lead? Same story. Write it down, and let's actually have an official figure on record. Think about it. Make sure that it's something that you're ready to commit to. Talk about it with your sales agents to make sure that it's a realistic figure. And then as a team, in the spirit of committing to internal excellence and driving the best results for yourselves, for your company, and for your salespeople, regulate off of this SLA. You basically set a standard and then create a report card on an ongoing basis to see how well you're actually measuring up to the mark that you have set for yourselves. Now, guys, I got to be honest. I'm going to say 1% of people that we deal with actually do this. This is not particularly complicated. The biggest challenge here is actually tracking those actual activities, and specifically speed to call. To do that requires having a little bit of a tech setup to actually document and track response times and calls, etc. Obviously, Lead Simple is a tool that you could use to accomplish that, but you could track that manually as well if you wanted to. But the bottom line here is that this is a huge game changer to actually have a standard and grade yourself against it on an ongoing basis. If you were to do this at your office, I can tell you that it would immediately move you into a way smaller, tinier, more aggressive bracket in terms of overall follow-up and conversion rate. And guys, bottom line, it's a zero-sum game out there. When you're talking about working with the consumers in your market, when you're talking about dealing with consumers that are conditioned to talk to more than one vendor at a time, to get quotes, to price compare, etc., you're going head to head against other people in your market. And it's either you or somebody else that is going to get to that lead, pitch them, and close them first. This is a great way to actually hold you and your team accountable in 2015. I love this quote from Chet Holmes. I come back to this time and time again. At the end of the day, people respect what you inspect. This isn't even necessarily referring to a cognitive thought process. This is just the simple reality that people stand up and stand at attention when they know there's going to be an inspection. So I want to talk about some specific best practices for how to incorporate your SLA, service level agreement, into your business. The first is monthly reviews on a monthly basis. Update that report card, send it out to your team, sit down, have conversations. Now, there may be some instances where some of those conversations are negative, some of them are positive. But in the big scheme of things, this is not about punishing people. This is not, going back to school and creating some burdensome pressure. This is about coaching, enabling your team to perform as well as possible so that they benefit, the company benefits, everybody wins here. So make this a part of your monthly operating procedure, is to review your SLA on an ongoing basis. Secondarily, display your SLA publicly. Make this a part of your culture, people. On the wall, on the office, whether or not it's on a LCD screen or if it's on a whiteboard, it really doesn't matter. But publicly display what the expectation is and what performance is against that expectation. This is a great way to inculcate and instill a culture of performance in your organization. If people aren't aware of what the standard is, or if it's not publicly displayed, it's out of sight, out of mind. Third step is connect it to pay. Now, there are two ways to do this. There's a direct and an indirect way. And a lot of people kind of tend to shudder at this because it feels a little bit extreme. Some people maybe get uncomfortable with the idea of changing comp structures with their agents. But the reality is that this is such a good idea for a lot of different reasons. The soft way to get at this, or rather, let me start off the other way. The direct way to get at this is straight dollars and cents. You, as an agent, need to be responding to leads within 5 minutes. You need to be making a minimum of 10 follow-ups for all leads marked as non-contactable, etc. Whatever it may be. You can obviously make an explicit one-to-one connection in that way. The other way to do this is via lead reassignment. So let's say, for example, within your office, however many agents you have, whether or not it's 2, 10, 100, whatever it may be, the 80-20 principle is absolutely going to be in effect. Whether or not you look at it in terms of individual people, you're going to have some agents that are closing an outsized volume of leads. You're going to have some agents that are sitting on and losing an outsized volume of leads. Or you could look at it on an individual basis. For any one performer, they're going to be sharper and better at one specific stage of the process. Are they a better opener? Are they a better closer? Or this could be time of day. Does somebody tend to take most of their phone calls and closes in the morning, afternoon, as it is a certain day of the week, whatever it may be? There's absolutely going to be variable performance within your organization, and that is something that you should respond to and leverage. So again, going back to the example of using an SLA, when and if you have somebody that is not meeting the SLA on a repeated basis, the opportunities should be moving away from them. And that's a fundamental law of nature. The companies and the organizations that have the most efficient sales process are going to be lead magnets, and it should be the same way in your organization. The closers, the people that are responding faster, quicker, closing more deals, should be getting a higher volume of leads. This is a dynamic thing that absolutely goes beyond initial lead distribution. Using a round robin model for initial lead distribution, that's fine. That's all well and good. But ultimately, after you've assigned that lead, if someone is sitting on it, that lead should be taken from them and reassigned. And this is a huge issue across a ton of organizations where there's a lot of forethought put into initial lead assignment, but then after a fact, people are more or less enabled to completely sit on leads with absolutely no accountability. So think about how you can make your SLA the benchmark for when and how leads are reassigned after initial lead assignment. Fifth step, process over outcomes. I want to repeat that, process over outcomes. Outcomes are what happened. Outcomes are your SLA. Outcomes are your conversion rate. Outcomes are the number of leads generated from marketing source XYZ. Process is why that happened. And I want to focus in on conversion rate just as an example. Most companies are not doing a great job of accurately tracking their close rate. It breaks my heart, but let's say you are. Let's say you are the guy that's monomaniacal about accurately tracking your close rate. That is fantastic. That's a great piece of information. It's a great diagnosis of what actually happened. But when we want to drill into what caused that, we have to look at the constituent events. We have to look at how quickly leads were responded to, what happened in the initial phone call, what happened in the first couple of follow-up steps, etc. So process is actually what defines the constituent steps that give rise to how any one given lead did or your overall aggregate sales results. So the goal here is to plan the work and work the plan. We want to be committed to focusing in process in the long haul. And it is so easy to get distracted with short-term results. I'd go back to marketing campaigns. This is something we have a fair bit of experience with and we see on an ongoing basis, where somebody will drop a de minimis amount on a new marketing source and then make a very premature judgment as to whether or not that lead source is actually viable or not. Different lead sources require more investment to actually mature. For example, there's a radical difference between the ramp up time for pay-per-click versus SEO, etc. But at the end of the day, there is what is called a valid sample set that is necessary to grade performance. And a lot of people are really impatient in terms of time, money, resources, etc. And what that means is you're making a judgment based on really faulty results. So as we commit to process in the long term is what is going to see us through the short term's up and downs. There are going to be variable results. You're going to try something new, it's going to blow up in your face. But the overall process that you have for grading, benchmarking, and refining the different aspects of your business, that's what's going to drive results in the long term. That is where the consistent, repeatable aspects of your business are going to exist and thrive. This is a great quote from Michael Malbosson. I'll let you read it for yourself here, but the basic idea is, again, what I just stated, that we want to focus on taking a long-term view of business. And I can't overemphasize that of the most successful clients that we work with, this is absolutely the common trait that they all share. We're talking about people in different industries, in different markets, with very different processes, and yet the overall commitment to process is what is absolutely the game changer here. And as we've seen some of those clients thriving, succeeding, growing, bringing more people in, it's always process at the front of the line. And it is that religious commitment to actually documenting in a thoughtful way that allows organizations to thrive and expand. Folks, those are the high points of what we have today. Again, my name is Jordan Muela. I do a monthly webinar here on the second Thursday of each month. You can go view the upcoming webinars on webinar.leadsimple.com. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar to everybody that is watching right now. One other thing I want to mention is go do yourself a favor. Go check out the Smart Property Manager's sales course at leadsimple.com/sales-course. If you thought this material was interesting, if you thought this was helpful, I want to encourage you to check this out, because the reality is this is just kind of a thumbnail sketch of some big ideas. We go in a much more comprehensive and deeper level of detail within this course. This course is free. It's dripped out via email. It's sent out over a series of, I want to say, approximately 10 weeks. This is something that I think you're going to find interesting and is definitely worth checking out. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm going to sign off. Happy Thursday. Happy selling. Have a good one.